Chapter 1. The Cage. The air was thick with the acrid stench of sweat, blood, and desperation. Inside the iron cage, a battle raged, and it was a fight to the death. Not for honor, not for pride, but for survival. The creatures within the cage were unlike anything I had ever seen, their forms twisted and alien, their eyes burning with the raw hunger of fighters who had been bred to kill. I had been watching them for weeks, these captives of war, chained in their own private hell, forced to clash in brutal combat for the entertainment of the highest bidder. They were nothing more than animals in the eyes of the ruling class, their lives worthless. But what had drawn me to them wasn't the brutality or the bloodshed. It was their strength, their defiance. These were creatures who had been broken and turned into tools, yet still, something in them fought to remain free. I had come from Earth, but my ship had crashed on this remote, hostile world during a routine mission, just another casualty in the long, unforgiving reach of the galaxy. The planet I had landed on, called Zarthos, had no mercy. It was a place where the strong dominated the weak, and the weak were used as sport. I'd learned quickly that this was not a world of kindness or justice. It was a world where survival meant killing, and killing meant profit. When I first stumbled upon the arena, it was a place I didn't want to be. I had hoped to avoid such places, the cruel underbelly of the universe, but fate, as it often does, had a different plan. The people here saw me as nothing more than a lost human, stranded in a pit of gladiators, each of them a monster from a different corner of the galaxy, born to fight and die in front of roaring crowds. But I saw something different in them. I saw the spark of life, of rebellion, even as their bodies were bloodied and beaten. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a warrior. I was a mechanic, a technician. My skills were supposed to be fixing ships, not saving lives. But when I saw them, those creatures locked in their cages, I knew something had to be done. The first time I stepped inside the arena, I felt the weight of the eyes on me. I was nothing in this world, a human in a galaxy full of powerful, terrifying beings. My presence meant nothing to them, just another insignificant life they could break for sport. But it was their eyes that haunted me, the ones of the creatures in the cages. It wasn't just pain I saw in them. It was more than that. It was defiance. It was the fight for survival. And it pulled me in, a gravitational force stronger than anything I had ever felt before. I had never been a hero, never considered myself someone who could change the fate of a war, a galaxy, or even a single life. But this felt different. I could no longer sit idly by, watching these beings, who had already suffered so much, continue to be exploited in such an inhuman way. The cages were filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy, their bodies covered in scars, their faces hardened with years of suffering. Some had reptilian scales, others had the sleek, fluid forms of aquatic creatures, while some were humanoid, though twisted by genetic alterations. But regardless of their appearance, they shared one thing in common: the desire to break free. And I knew, somehow, that they could. It started with the smallest of steps. I knew the guards in charge of the cage didn't pay much attention to me. I was just another survivor on this cruel world. I wasn't strong, I wasn't a threat, but I was observant. I learned the routines of the guards, their schedules, and how the arena operated. Every night, they gathered around the cages, drinking, gambling, watching the fights. And every night, the creatures inside those cages fought for their lives, knowing that one loss meant death. It wasn't long before I found my opportunity. One evening, I managed to slip past the guards, unnoticed, and I made my way toward the cages. It was a risk, but the gamble was worth it. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the rusty door to the cages, a lock holding it shut. I had no tools, nothing but my hands. But as a mechanic, I knew how to break things open. My mind went to work quickly, finding the weak points in the lock and manipulating the mechanisms until I felt the satisfying click of release. I opened the door, the heavy metal creaking, and I stepped into the cage for the first time. The creatures within stared at me, their eyes full of confusion, anger, and suspicion. They had been conditioned to distrust humans, to fear anyone who might be their captor or dealer. But something shifted when I stepped into their midst. The very air felt charged with energy, like the calm before a storm. I wasn't here to hurt them. I wasn't here to take them back to their torment. I was here to set them free. The first to respond was a massive creature, its horns curved upward like a ram's. Its eyes, glowing with an eerie intensity, focused on me. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but I saw something in its gaze. The smallest flicker of hope. It stepped forward slowly, its movements deliberate, as if assessing me, testing me. "I am not your enemy," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper against the noise of the arena. The creature didn't respond at first, but as I moved toward the lock that held it in place, it stepped closer, its massive hand pressing against the bars. I unlocked the creature's chains with a careful touch, making sure to release it without causing harm. As the lock clicked open, it stepped forward, stretching its limbs, flexing its shoulders. It was free, and I was the one who had freed it. The creature didn't thank me, didn't bow or show gratitude. Instead, it simply stood there, watching me with the same glowing eyes. And then, with a low, rumbling growl, it turned toward the other creatures in the cage, as if signaling them to follow. One by one, they emerged, their bodies covered in scars, their eyes filled with a silent, growing understanding. I wasn't here to fight them. I wasn't here to enslave them. I was here to help them. And that was something no one had ever done for them before. As I looked around the cage, I knew that this was only the beginning. The creatures were free, but they were still imprisoned by their past, by the trauma they had endured. I had given them the gift of freedom, but what they did with it was up to them. Some might leave and disappear into the vastness of the galaxy, while others might seek vengeance on those who had tortured them for so long. And me? I had no idea what my role was in all of this, but I couldn't back out now. But as the last of the creatures emerged from the cage, their eyes now filled with something new: hope, defiance, a burning desire for something better. I realized something. They weren't just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. And somewhere, deep inside me, I understood that this fight wasn't just about them. It was about all of us. It was about breaking the chains that bound us, whether they were physical or mental. It was about freedom. And together, we would fight for that future. But there was one more thing I didn't expect. As the creatures began to move, stretching their limbs, preparing to leave, one of the most fearsome of them all, a being with black, scaled wings and eyes that burned with an inner fire, stepped closer to me. This one didn't back away. Instead, it reached out and placed its massive hand on my shoulder, its claws digging into my flesh, its gaze intense and full of something I hadn't anticipated. The creature stared at me for a long time, and in that moment, I felt an energy I hadn't expected, a pull, a connection. "You have freed us," it said, its voice a deep, guttural growl that reverberated in my bones. "But now we fight for something more. Now we fight to be with you." My heart skipped a beat as I looked into its eyes. The creature was not just a fighter. It was something else. And in that moment, I understood. I had set them free. But in the process, I had also freed myself. The fight for survival was no longer the only fight in my life. The fight for love, for connection, for something deeper was about to begin. The moment those words left the creature's mouth, everything in my life seemed to shift. I wasn't just some mechanic anymore, some wanderer trying to survive on a hostile planet. I had become part of something larger, something more dangerous and more alive than I had ever imagined. The creature, with its dark, glistening wings and burning eyes, was no longer just a freed prisoner. It was something deeper, something that I couldn't yet understand, but that seemed to see me in a way that no one else ever had. It wasn't simply gratitude. No, this was different. It was a bond, a pull that ran deeper than anything I had ever felt. I stood there, frozen for a moment, as the creature's massive hand, its claws still digging into my shoulder, seemed to send waves of energy through my body. Its gaze held mine with an intensity that was almost otherworldly, and as it stepped back slightly, I felt the weight of its attention on me like a physical presence. It wasn't just the bond of survival. It wasn't just freedom. It was something else, something primal and raw, something that didn't make sense but was undeniable. The other creatures, the ones I had freed from their cages, began to move, their bodies rippling with newfound energy. They were stretching, testing their limbs, and yet all of them, no matter their form or their origins, turned to look at me, their eyes now filled with something different. No longer just fear, but respect, curiosity, and strangely enough, something softer. It was as if, for the first time in their lives, they were seeing the world with new eyes, eyes that held hope, eyes that saw not a human, but a force. a companion, a potential ally, a mate. And then the creature that had spoken, this dark, winged one, the most fearsome of them all, stepped forward. The others fell into a loose circle around me, some cautious, others eager, but all watching, waiting, as if this moment, this single step forward, would determine everything. "I will stay," it said, its voice rich and deep, like thunder rolling over the sky. "We are free, and we fight as one. But we fight for you now, human. You freed us. You have given us life, and for that, we will give you our loyalty, our strength. We will fight for you, and with you." The words hung in the air between us like a declaration, heavy with meaning. My heart pounded in my chest as I processed what had just happened. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared to lead a group of alien fighters who had once been caged for sport and who now owed me their freedom. I didn't know what kind of war we were about to face, or how I could keep them alive. But one thing was certain: I couldn't run from this. I couldn't run from them. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why fight for me? I'm just a mechanic. I don't have anything to offer. I can't lead an army." The creature's glowing eyes softened, and it reached out, placing its enormous hand on my shoulder once again. This time, the gesture wasn't threatening, nor demanding. It was comforting. "You freed us," it said, its tone shifting, becoming something softer, more personal. "And in doing so, you gave us something we hadn't had for a long time. Hope. It doesn't matter who you are, human. It matters what you've done. You've done what no one else has done. You saw us for what we are, not for what we were made to be." I blinked, unsure of what to say. How could I possibly respond to that? How could I explain that I had simply acted out of compassion, that I didn't know what I was doing, but in the heat of the moment, I knew I couldn't leave them to suffer? There was no grand plan, no deep strategy, just instinct, the need to do something. "Name yourself," the creature said, its eyes glinting with something that almost seemed like amusement now. "We are bound to you, but we would know the name of the one who freed us." "Name?" I repeated, confused. "I'm just a human. Nathaniel. Nathaniel Gray. That's all." "Nathaniel," the creature rumbled, as though testing the sound of it. "Then we will call you Nathaniel. You are our leader now." A cold shiver ran down my spine as the weight of those words hit me. They weren't just following me out of necessity. They were choosing to follow me, to fight alongside me, to give me their loyalty, their strength. These beings, who had once been torn apart and broken by the hands of their captors, were now standing in front of me, their eyes filled with trust. It was more than I could bear, but I didn't have time to question it. The moment was fleeting, and I knew there was no turning back. We had to move. The guards, the dealers, the men who profited off their suffering, they would come for us. They would come for them. For all of us. "Get ready," I said, my voice steely with resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "We've got a lot of work to do." The creature that had spoken to me nodded, its wings fluttering slightly, as if testing their strength. "We are ready," it said, "and we will fight beside you." And so we moved out. Together. Chapter 2. The Rebellion. We didn't waste any time. The Dominion, the ruthless empire that controlled most of the galaxy, would not allow us to slip away unnoticed. They had countless resources at their disposal, and their agents were already on the planet, hunting for us. We couldn't stay hidden forever, but we didn't need to hide. We were no longer slaves. We were rebels. The first step was simple: disrupt their operations, cut off their flow of resources, and make them realize that there was a force out there that couldn't be controlled. I was just a mechanic, but I knew ships. I knew engines. And most importantly, I knew how to break things. The creatures now called my fighters were eager to prove themselves. Their powers, each more unique and terrifying than the last, were nothing short of awe-inspiring. From the winged warrior who could launch himself into the sky with the force of a rocket to the massive creature with retractable claws sharp enough to tear through steel, each one had a gift. A gift that, together, made them a force that the Dominion couldn't ignore. Our first mission was straightforward. We raided a supply depot, stealing the weapons, food, and resources that the Dominion had been hoarding on Zarthos. It wasn't just about the supplies. It was about sending a message. That we were here. That we were fighting back. We weren't afraid of them. The mission was a success. But as we escaped the depot, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Dominion would retaliate. They would send everything they had to stop us. And that's when I realized that the war we had just begun wasn't going to be a simple fight. It was a revolution. And I, Nathaniel Gray, a mechanic who had never asked for this, was at the center of it. The supply raid was just the beginning. We had captured weapons, food, and enough tech to keep us operational for a while, but it wasn't enough to take on the Dominion head-on. We needed allies. We needed more fighters. And most importantly, we needed to expose the cracks in the Dominion's carefully built empire. They were everywhere on every planet, in every system, but they were also fragile, hanging on by the thinnest of threads. The Dominion's arrogance had led them to believe they were invincible, that no force in the galaxy could challenge their might. And that belief would be their downfall. But I was no general. I wasn't a soldier. I was just a mechanic. I had no experience in organizing revolutions or fighting wars. Yet, here I was, leading a ragtag group of creatures who were now counting on me to guide them. There were moments when I doubted myself, moments when the weight of their expectations threatened to crush me. But in those moments, I would look at them, the warriors, the fighters, the survivors, and I knew that they had chosen me for a reason. They had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. And with that knowledge, I pushed forward. The plan was simple in its execution, but complex in its scope. We would strike at the Dominion's supply lines across the Outer Rim, disrupt their communications, and spread the seeds of rebellion to every corner of their empire. It wasn't a full-scale assault yet, but it was enough to make the Dominion take notice. Our first target was a communications relay on the moon of Therion 5. We moved quickly, striking under the cover of darkness, slipping past Dominion patrols with ease. Vera, the creature with the black wings, led the charge, her power unmatched as she tore through enemy forces. Her attacks were calculated, swift, leaving no room for retaliation. The others followed, each one displaying their unique abilities, from cloaking and stealth to brute force that made the ground shake. I couldn't help but feel awe for them. They weren't just fighters, they were a force of nature. As the relay station fell into our hands, I couldn't help but smile. It was working. We were making a difference. But that night, as we celebrated our victory, I felt a strange tension in the air. Something was coming, something I couldn't see but could feel. The Dominion would respond. I knew they wouldn't let this rebellion go unpunished. And sure enough, days later, a massive Dominion fleet arrived in the system. They had been tracking our movements, and now they were closing in. We had no choice but to face them head-on. It was time for our first real battle. A battle that would decide the fate of our rebellion and perhaps the fate of the galaxy. As we prepared for the fight, Vera came to me, her eyes serious. "You're not like the others, Nathaniel," she said. "You're more than just the one who freed us. You've become our leader, our symbol. And now, we fight for you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't prepared for the responsibility that came with being their leader. I wasn't prepared for the weight of their trust. But I couldn't back down now. The fleet was coming. And if we didn't fight back, everything we had fought for, everything we had gained would be lost. We had no choice but to stand and face the enemy, to make our stand as rebels, as freedom fighters, and to prove that no matter how powerful the Dominion was, they could never break us. Chapter 3: The Battle for Freedom. The first sight of the Dominion fleet was nothing short of overwhelming. A dozen massive warships, their engines blazing with deadly precision, hovered above Therion 5's surface, casting long shadows across the moon's rugged landscape. The sheer scale of the fleet was terrifying, and I couldn't help but feel a cold shiver run down my spine. I had no military experience. I had only been a mechanic, a survivor. Yet, now, I was leading an army of creatures who had been wronged, whose lives had been taken from them, but who now stood beside me, ready to fight for something bigger than themselves, ready to fight for freedom. Vera and the others were already moving into position, their bodies tense, their minds focused. They had trained for this. They were fighters, born and made for war. And yet, I could see it in their eyes: uncertainty, fear, the weight of what we were about to face. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle that would determine whether we would live free or be crushed beneath the boot of the Dominion. As the fleet descended, I called to the creatures, rallying them. "This is it," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "We fight together. We fight for each other. We fight for freedom. And we will not back down." The roar of their approval was deafening, a sound that shook the ground beneath us. They were ready. We were ready. "Vera, with her wings spread wide, took to the sky, a shadow of power and grace. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a symbol. She was the heart of our rebellion, the embodiment of everything we had fought for. The others followed, their movements synchronized, each one a force unto themselves. But it was the moment Vera unleashed her attack that changed everything. With a roar that could have torn the sky in two, she released a burst of pure energy from her core, sending a wave of destruction crashing into the first of the Dominion ships. The explosion lit up the sky like a star being born, sending shockwaves that rattled the remaining fleet. The Dominion was unprepared. They had thought us weak, thought us easy prey. But they had underestimated the power of freedom. They had underestimated what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. The battle was fierce, brutal. Explosions rocked the battlefield as we clashed with the Dominion's forces. I fought alongside the creatures, my blasters firing with deadly precision, my heart pounding in my chest. The Dominion's ships were powerful, but they were slow. We used the terrain to our advantage, striking from hidden positions, attacking with everything we had. But it wasn't enough. As the battle raged on, I saw it something I had feared. The Dominion was regrouping. They were deploying their Special Forces elite soldiers designed to crush any resistance. And they were coming for us. Vera saw it too. Her eyes met mine across the chaos, and without a word, we both knew what had to be done. We had to take down the command ship. If we didn't, the entire rebellion would be crushed. With a roar, Vera took off again, flying straight into the heart of the Dominion's forces, her body a blur of fury. I followed her, charging alongside the fighters. The command ship loomed large in front of us, its weapons trained on the ground below, ready to unleash destruction. But Vera was faster, more agile. She dove toward the ship, her wings slicing through the air, her body a streak of light as she tore through the hull. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Dominion command ship erupted in a burst of fire and metal, scattering debris in every direction. The fleet faltered. The tide of battle shifted. The Dominion's forces began to retreat, disarray spreading through their ranks. We had won. For now. But I knew this was just the beginning. The Dominion would regroup. They would send more ships, more soldiers. But this time, they would know our names. They would know the name of Nathaniel Gray the human who had led an uprising and changed the fate of a galaxy. The aftermath of the battle was deafening. The silence that followed the explosive roar of the Dominion's command ship was so complete that it felt as though the universe itself had held its breath. We stood in the ruins, dust settling around us like a shroud. The air was thick with the smell of burned metal, acrid smoke, and the sharp tang of blood. But it was not the stench of defeat, it was the scent of victory. We had fought and we had won, against impossible odds, against a power far greater than us. The Dominion had never expected us to succeed. They had underestimated the will of those they had enslaved, the determination of creatures who had been broken but not destroyed. Vera, standing beside me, her wings folded against her back, surveyed the battlefield with the calm of someone who had known war all her life. She had been a prisoner once, forced to fight for sport, for the amusement of others. But no more. Now, she was free. Now we were free. And we had created something that the Dominion could not crush, no matter how many ships they sent or how many soldiers they deployed. We had built a rebellion that was no longer just about surviving. It was about something much more powerful. It was about fighting for the future, fighting for something worth living for. I turned to Vera, our eyes meeting as the other fighters gathered around us, their faces grim but proud. We did it, I said, the words coming out in a breathless rush. She nodded slowly, her expression softening, her fiery eyes filled with something akin to pride. Yes, we did. And now we build. The galaxy will know what we stand for. We began our journey toward the capital city of the Dominion, now shattered, its leaders fleeing in every direction. The rebellion we had ignited was spreading, like wildfire, across the galaxy. Systems that had once been too afraid to resist were rising up. From every corner of the galaxy, voices that had once been silenced by the Dominion were now shouting for justice, for freedom. And we were at the heart of it all. Our ragtag group of survivors, our family, was becoming something more, a movement. The Dominion would not fall easily. They had their armies, their fleets, and their weapons. But they also had their weakness. The more they fought back, the more the people of the galaxy would rise up. They could no longer silence us. They could no longer control us. And though the war was far from over, I knew one thing. We were ready for whatever came next. Together, we were unstoppable. Chapter 4. The Price of Victory. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy watched as we stood tall. The Dominion had been forced to retreat, their power shaken, their confidence shattered. But victory came at a cost. We had lost fighters in the battle. We had lost friends. The scars of the war were deep, and the galaxy was still a place of uncertainty. But we had done it. We had fought for freedom, and we had won. The rebellion had started, and it was only going to grow from here. But as the days passed, and the damage was repaired, one thing became clear to me. The creatures who had fought beside me, my fighters, had become something more. They weren't just warriors. They were my family. They were my team. And, whether I had intended it or not, they had become my mates. It was a strange feeling, one that took me by surprise. But as I stood alongside Vera, watching the stars, I knew one thing for certain. We were no longer just fighting for survival. We were fighting for each other. And that fight wasn't over yet. In the months that followed, we continued to strike at the heart of the Dominion, disrupting their operations, rallying more systems to our cause. We weren't just a rebellion anymore. We were a revolution. The people of the galaxy, once oppressed, were now rising up. The Dominion could not stand against the tide of freedom, no matter how many ships they sent. And through it all, Vera stood by my side, her wings now a symbol of hope. My fighters, my mates, fought for each other, fought for freedom, and fought for the future. Together, we would bring an end to the tyranny that had plagued the galaxy for far too long. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We had started something that could never be undone. We had won, and we were just getting started.